don't write any of the speeches, and not involved in the planning of these events. My view is this: common.
Did humility define this? Do you think?
I don't know, Casey. Look, I mean, it is not uncommon for the United States political leadership to how many ships are we sinking? How many missiles are we destroying? How much of the enemy are we, defeating in our military targets and so on?
Is it the United States of Jesus or the United States of America? I mean, the United States of America believes in the use of international humanitarian laws. It believes in democracy. It believes the presidency being accountable to people and justifying themselves to people. The United States of Jesus believe in the use of the Bible to justify each and every action that our administration takes. They believe if they are going to war, then make it about the Bible. They believe if you have disagreements about someone, make it about the Bible. They believe if something's supposed to be sorted out or a reason is supposed to be given to the people, instead of giving them the reason, talk about the Bible. And this has been a trend. It started with Donald Trump depicting himself as Jesus. Then it went to J.D. Vance telling the Pope to get off his keys about theology. Today it's about Pete Hegseth quoting the Bible, the story of the Pharisees, and relating that to journalists. Then Pete Hegseth borrowing from Samuel Jackson's movie when he used the Bible to justify doing something that is inherently inhumane. Why does things relating to military have to be explained using the biblical terms instead of military terms? The biggest question is, if Iran decides to adopt the same standards as the United States, what's the future of this war?
The Pope.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially the American Pope.
That struck me as such an odd, I don't mean to interrupt Jonah, but that struck me as such an odd response. I mean, why wouldn't the President of the United States want to meet with the Pope just as a global leader who has influence over, 1 billion plus people around the world? All right, I'm sorry. Weak on crime and terrible on foreign policy. My fault.
You mentioned, Jonah, how this administration is talking about religion. And I want to play something that Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, I mean, you heard him talk about, comparing the media, which, let's note, the press, freedom of the press is enshrined in the Constitution. For those of you who aren't as familiar, or who may not be familiar with the Pharisees, right? He's essentially saying that the press betrays the country, right? The Pharisees betraying Jesus Christ. It's a pretty significant statement he was making there. But I want to draw your attention to something that played out actually at a prayer service at the Pentagon, which is something that the defense secretary is now doing. He offered what he pointed to as a prayer. One, this drew attention online. You could figure out where the prayer actually originated. We want to kind of play for you what was pointed out as far as whether, did this come from the Bible or did it come from Hollywood?
Realism theory is called Robert Nebo, and Robert Nebo did coin a term that relates to religion and civil societies, or religions and presidential administration. His theory of moral man and immoral society is based on the logic that presidents and leaders are sometimes faced to deal with tragic necessities like going to war or having to wipe an entire civilization. And the reason why they have to do that, to fight the greater evil. So the tragic necessity here is fighting greater evil. Though the action is basically unbiblical, the action is unjustifiable in godly standards and even in humanitarian standards. But sometimes they have to do it because the greater good is to protect the society from the greater evil. Now, does that theory ring a bell, or do the terms that I've used there ring a bell? You see, Donald Trump has been depicted as Jesus, right? He's been depicted as this religious leader appointed by God. And then you've seen like his MAGA base. Basically, some of them behave like in a manner that they even worship him. But put that aside. Let's go back to the situation between Iran and the United States. When Donald Trump justified some of the reasons why they were going to that war, he gave many of them, including nuclear, a regime change, and all those many other things, Iran being a terrorism group for over 40 years. But one of the things that he gave that relates to the theory coined by Robert Nebo, he said the Iranian regime is evil. And so the United States needs to go to war to fight evil. It was a war against evil. Does it ring a bell? And why would he need to use that at this particular moment? Who is his base? His base is MAGA. And one of the traits amongst MAGA, the MAGA base, is that they're largely religious. It's a base that is composed of a bigger religious community. And when they quote Bible too much, it's not a justification to everyone in the society. It's a justification towards a certain group. The information is targeted towards a certain group. But over time, you come to understand that most administrations or most presidencies and societies that tend to overuse religion to justify everything are probably doing something wrong. And the people there really believe too much in religion.
To me, I think as Americans look at the overall project here, they want to know, are we winning militarily and are we getting close to meeting our goal of keeping these people, these fanatics, from getting a nuclear weapon? That's basically the information that I think needs to be communicated.
And what would you say about the productivity of picking a fight with the first American Pope?
I agreed with what the president said today. He's welcome to his statements, and he says, he's more than welcome to do that. And the president's more than welcome to disagree. I mean, the Pope has a job to do in his role as Pope. The president has a job to do in his role as the president. And he has said, we're not going to let Iran get a nuclear weapon. And frankly, my understanding is the Pope doesn't believe in nuclear weapons either. So he should look at this as an opportunity to say, hey, we're all in alignment on at least this one goal. Let's keep these fanatics that hate Western civilization from getting a nuclear weapon.
Can we just backpedal here though just a little as to how this all started? This all started because the President of the United States went on social media Easter Sunday and the day after, basically saying that he was going to destroy the civilization of Iran. And that prompted backlash because people not only saw it as war crimes, but immoral. And so the debate started with actions that the president took and not really about whether or not Iran should have nuclear weapons. This is really about what this president has said he will do to the people of Iran in order to get that outcome.
Should presidents really use religion to justify whatever they do? Should presidents be religious? At the end of the day, the beliefs of someone is only meant to be their beliefs, and I believe that belief should not always be implicated into the society. The problem with what happens here is if that belief is somehow pushed towards a society, if that belief is used to justify everything, then one of the elements of leadership starts to dwindle. The presidency exists to serve human beings. The presidency exists to serve a people. And sometimes the doctrine of a people and the doctrines of religion may not really be in line. And you've known how the laws of man and the laws of Christianity or the laws of the Bible can sometimes vary. Talk of abortion, talk about gay marriage and all those other instances. But in terms of war, when religion is brought into war, then what happens? If you go by the theory that I did introduce you to, the theory of moral man in the moral society, and compare that to military theory and the theories of diplomacy and liberalism that says sometimes war is supposed to, despite fighting the war, humanitarian laws must be preserved. When someone goes by biblical things to justify the opponents as greatly evil, then they are somehow allowed to use any force possible to fight the war. But casualties are no longer talked about, because when casualties suffer, you bring the theory of altruism, where everything has to be done for the greater good, regardless of the suffering of the few. If presidents go by religion and they justify everything religiously, then international humanitarian laws will suffer. I mean, we are going to destroy an entire civilization. Who gets to suffer? Why are you considering yourself too much religious, and why are you going everything by religion? Well, yet you just did pick a fight with one of the religious figures.
You're living several days ago. Where do we stand today? We have a ceasefire.
Sorry. I'm so sorry to give context.
We have a ceasefire. Right. We have a blockade that's working. Basically, no bombs are falling right now. And we're on the brink, hopefully, of a diplomatic solution that will take away nuclear material from these fanatics and make the region and the world a safer place. Is this not an acceptable outcome?
If this happens, I think everyone will be absolutely thrilled. I think
but you'll still be arguing about the memes and the tweets?
No. I think the context was we were talking about religion. And so therefore, and the fight with the Pope. And so therefore I was giving the context of how this all started. It's not...
It's okay to cheer for a good outcome. It's okay to cheer for a good outcome.
Nothing starts, 2 minutes ago. This has context. I was giving it. I didn't.
But also, why can't Donald Trump say some version of what you just said? Why is Donald Trump's sort of egotistical, frankly sacrilegious response to criticism from the Pope, which, by the way, is consistent historically, at least in terms of modern popes, it is historically consistent that popes, John Paul II was very involved in pushing back the Soviet Union from Poland. You had Pope who came to the White House to talk to LBJ about ending the war in Vietnam. There is historical consistency with the Pope, in the Pope, making a statement of morality when it comes to issues of war and peace. Donald Trump is the difference here. Donald Trump's reaction is the difference here.
But you would agree it's not uncommon for presidents of the United States to disagree with popes, right?
Sure.
Will just continue to expand in the future. The disagreements between the theological beliefs and what the Bible proposes versus what is needed for human rights is likely to expand and continue being an issue of contention in the future. I mean, think of things like LGBTQ matters. It's unbiblical if you go by the biblical standards. Even Muslims don't subscribe to it. Think of the issues like abortion. Sometimes it's justifiable, but people will quote the Bible to make it unjustifiable. Then think of issues like war. Sometimes nations like Israel can make the war look like a holy mission and a holy commitment, and there is a whole different theory for that, the Israel theory about war. And what is happening here is the collision between the church and politics. When a political group, or when an administrative group like the presidential group or an executive group of a society is so much entrenched into religion, then they are bound to rub shoulders by the custodians of that religion, because deeply, politicians are not meant to be the religious council, unless it's in societies like the Islam societies, that is sometimes might, like in the case of Iran. But in Christian societies, Christianity is headed by different groups, different from politicians. But when they merge, then there is a problem. Do you saw that problem with Biden? He's a Catholic who did believe that sometimes people deserve to have human rights, that people deserve to have abortions, people deserve to marry whoever they want to marry, as long as it's legal and constitutional. And that's where the problem comes. The laws of God and the laws of man sometimes are not in sync, because the laws of God, or as put in the Bible, sometimes condemn certain behavior, and the laws of man is always open to change. It's always dynamic, and it's very adaptable to current societal standards. However, politicians, being very influential, can sometimes rub shoulders with the religious leaders not agreeing with their proposition. Agrees with the order of diplomacy, and he believes that of the three tenets that a society can use to meet its needs should be upheld. That is, first you do diplomacy talks, then you can use economic sanctions before you go to military. Donald Trump does not agree with the post order. Donald Trump has his own order. His own order is always, first we start with the military, and while it's working, we can go to economy, and if both are working, then we go to diplomacy. A different way of negotiating, different from other presidencies. That is against the order of peace, and especially for a guy who did propose peace so much, and now he's going to the military. Even I believe the Pope is somehow surprised. Want this what you are against? The church is like the fifth state, the fifth state, while the middle is the fourth. The church comes at number 5. Always monitoring state action and always pointing out injustices whenever it comes up. And the problem is this is allowed to continue, and Iran adopts also the same mentality, then you have a clash of beliefs. One of the problems between the Western society and certain countries in the Middle East like Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan started with one thing: the clash of beliefs. There was always the Islam belief, and then there is always the Christian belief. And make myself clear that not every element of Islamism is evil. Not every element of Islamism believes in war and the war of revenge. But one thing that I know with Islamism, they always believe in preservation of their culture and practices. When Westernization was colonizing the world, and when Europeans were moving around the world colonizing different countries, they changed the cultures of those countries. They did what was called assimilation. But Muslim has always been independent. Even in colonization, the Islam culture always remained that. And in some of these places like Iran, in Syria, and in Afghanistan, and even in Lebanon, they always did believe that the Westernization was a corruption to the Islam culture and practices. And that's where some of the disagreements started beginning. And this takes you back to the bigger problem here, the clash of beliefs. You see, Christianity believes oftentimes believe in sometimes being very liberal and freedoms and certain rights. Islamism believes in being conservative and being the greatest custodian of certain cultural practices, as it were inherited throughout the generations. And trust me, you will never see any Islam country that will allow LGBTQ matters to prosper. You'll never see Islam countries that allows freedom of abortion, unless it's very medical. But in Christian society, that is allowed because inside society, they can adapt to changes, they can adapt to human rights, they can adapt to, the times. It's something that evolves. And in the Christian society, sometimes the needs of human beings are sometimes placed way ahead of what the religion proposes or the restrictions that are put by the Bible. Now that you know that, what happens here? Donald Trump has just returned people to that war, the war between two different beliefs. Because while he bombs Iran and he goes ahead doing all these things that he wants to do, when he gets home and he has to justify the reason why he's doing everything, they go biblical. I mean, you could talk of the reason why you're doing it. You could talk of nuclear and all these matters. And the cabinet secretary for war or defense could come out and easily explain that in terms of normal human rights matters. But when they have to really bring religion to it, you are preparing people for a clash. So let's say what happens when they also decide to go, Iranians also decide to go by the religious standards. You see, that creates chaos. The different beliefs just continue piling over and over again. And this takes me to this one point. And let me relate it to terror. You see, not every faction of Muslim or Islam culture proposes terror. There are certain radical elements of it that do that. And that's why people like the Pope are often talking about diplomacy and peace above everything else instead of going to war. When you use diplomacy, it's much easier to establish a relationship with people and thus suppressing elements like terror from happening. But when you go ahead to war, you create an environment for revenge. And a good example is what is happening between Israel and Gaza. You see, Israel went into Gaza to launch all this operation because they did believe that they were protecting themselves. And in the process, their main target was Hamas. In the process, they ended up doing much more damage, bulldozing houses, destroying houses, civilians dying, destroying hospitals, and every amenity that was there. You see, by the time someone is paid, they become vulnerable. When someone is at a point of loss of something, they become much more susceptible to every suggestion that someone is likely to give them. And that pain does not leave their heart. It lingers within them for a very long time. That is what brews hate. That is what brews like the spirit of revenge and always fighting back. If you wanted to end it, then you should have made the target clear, like make Hamas the target and avoid the civilians. And I think that's why international humanitarian laws exist besides the preservation of human life. Sometimes they exist to avoid this revenge mentality. Because one of the reasons why terror never ends, some certain elements of it is about terror. If you killed Osama bin Laden, we'll pay back. You killed the head of the Iranian Guard Corps, will pay back. You killed who and who had in Afghanistan, they'll pay back. That back and forth explains the reasons why terror does not exist. And the military industrial complex just takes advantage of it. They fought back. This person is going to fight back. At the end of the day, you are going to make more profit. At the end of the day, all of you are going to need weapons. So you're fueling something while claiming that you're fighting the greater evil. In reality, the greater evil is always down to the policies that define the mission to go to war, the policies that define a nation's stance on how it relates to others and how it establishes alliances, the policy that define how a nation defines its enemies. And so you're looking towards a future where if Iran decides to establish its military response and they tie that military response to religion, then what happens? The radical aspect of Islamism, like those proposed by the Houthis and the Hezbollah and Hamas, decides to they prop up everywhere and they decide to go towards civilians and do damages towards civilians. Those elements do not respect anything called the humanitarian laws. They don't abide by it. They abide by the spirit of revenge. They abide by this deeply rooted culture of evil that defines what they do at the end of the day. If Donald Trump really needed an off-ramp and they needed something like to really help him, we should have done things like really the Obama way. If you're able to get all the factions to agree with you, if you're able to get your members of your alliances and some parts of your enemy to agree with you, then like you're in much a better path than he is in right now. Because Obama did get the Catholic, not the Catholics, but Obama did get the Europeans and people from the Middle East and Americans to entirely agree with his deal that he made there. But then, by then there was no war, so the Pope was not much involved, and actually the Pope appreciated it because it was part of a peace plan or diplomacy was prevailing. But now you're fighting a war and you don't have alliances, you don't have the Catholic fraternities against you, then you have even a bigger problem explaining the moments of peace, because peace should be a victory worth celebrating. And the only problem for you is, how do you justify how you achieved the peace? A lot of people died, a lot of facilities were damaged, there was a fight between you and the Pope. And it becomes difficult because of his philosophy, because of Donald Trump's philosophy and approach to international relations. Oftentimes things begins from diplomacy to economic, then to military. With him, it starts from the military, then to economic, and sometimes to diplomacy. Makes you have problems and rub shoulders the wrong way with everyone, even if your commitments or your goals were just somehow very noble.